Religion 230, Week 15 Lecture, The Modern Catholic Church. As we have seen, at the end of the 19th century, Pope Leo XIII set the tone for Catholic social teaching with his encyclical Rerum Novarum, published in 1891. In that text, the Pope rejected socialism, which is the idea that the means of production, distribution, and exchange of goods should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. But he taught that the state needs to promote social justice by protecting the rights of all. He also set out the principle that the Church needs to speak out on social issues, including economic unfairness. It really stressed that the poor have a much tougher time than other social classes, and so need to be a special object of focus. This laid out the modern Catholic principle of the preferential option for the poor. Later papal documents also picked up on this theme, and the theme of economic justice. For example, Pope Pius XI issued Quadragesimo Anno, and that was in 1931 during the Great Depression, which pointed out that the dangers to society if capitalism is unrestrained, and noted that to create a just society, economic forces can't be allowed to work on their own. However, he also condemned totalitarianism and communism, trying to seek out a fair balance between the benefits of capitalism and individual rights that needed to be safeguarded. The next pope, Pius XII, repeated these social teachings and expanded them beyond simply owners and workers to apply to other professions such as politicians, teachers, farmers, housewives, soldiers, etc. He defined social teachings in the areas of medicine, sports, psychology, science, law, and education, even TV and other media. In fact, he was called the Pope of Technology for his willingness and ability to examine the social implications of technological advances. But his focus was always on the dignity and rights of the individual. The Catholic Church certainly took a prominent role in shaping the labor movement in the United States. In 1933, two American Catholics, Dorothy Day and Peter Maurin, founded a new Catholic peace group, the Catholic Worker, that would embody their ideals of pacifism, commitment to the poor, and a fundamental change in American society. But even as popes were beginning to move forward and embrace their leadership role in contemporary society, and that was even after losing all temporal government rights over the Papal States in 1870 to the Unified Kingdom of Italy, and after 1929, they had only the Vatican City, which was that very small area within Rome that actually belonged to the papacy. The Church was also experiencing a great deal of persecution in many places, as anti-clerical and anti-religious governments were formed, especially fascist and communist governments. In Latin America, various anti-clerical regimes came in power from the 1830s. But in the 1920s and 30s, the Church experienced unprecedented persecution in Russia, Spain, and Mexico. During the Civil War in Spain, starting in 1936, thousands of churches were destroyed, at least 13 bishops and almost 7,000 clergy and religious were killed. After these experiences, Pius XI came out strongly against communism in his encyclical Divini Redemptoris in 1937. In China, the rise of communist power in 1949 led to the mistreatment and expulsion of all foreign missionaries. The new government created an alternative church, the Patriotic Church, which was meant to replace the Catholic Church. All bishops were appointed by the government, and priests were forced to swear allegiance to the government or go to prison. But while the Pope had to deal with fascism in Italy in such a way as to allow the Church to survive, and in fact some have been critical of the accommodations that were made, He spoke out more forcefully against Nazism in Germany. Although even with that, Pope Pius XI has been criticized for not being strong enough. In 1933, the Vatican had signed an agreement, or concordat, with Germany, partly in an effort to stop persecution of Catholic institutions. But when persecution expanded, the Pope published the 1937 encyclical Mit brennender Sorge, in which he warned Catholics that anti-Semitism is incompatible with Christianity. The text was spirited in and read from all Catholic pulpits on the same Sunday throughout Germany. It described Hitler as an insane and arrogant prophet, and was the first official denunciation of Nazism made by any major organization. After this, persecution of the Catholic Church became far more obvious, with clergy arrested, property seized, etc. Likewise, Pope Pius XII, the next pope, has been criticized for not doing enough against the Holocaust, in the way that, for example, Pope Benedict XV did in his strong call for peace during World War I. Pius never defended himself against these charges, but it is pretty clear that while he was careful in his dealings with totalitarian governments, and was willing to make concessions to protect Catholics, he also acted secretly to assist Jews, especially in Rome, where some thousands of Jews were hidden and protected in Catholic buildings and institutions. Even before the opening of the Second Vatican Council, which was, as you will hear in the other videos, a big surprise, Ecumenism was already a concern in the Church of the 20th century. Earlier efforts had not been too successful, but with the aggiornamento, or the opening up of the Church's windows to the world, displayed at Vatican II, seeking unity and understanding between Christians of all sorts became a high priority for the Church. In 1965, Pope Paul VI and the Orthodox Patriarch Athenagoras issued a joint expression of regret for the past actions that had led up to the Great Schism between the Eastern and the Western churches. At the same time, they lifted the mutual excommunications from the 11th century. The Catholic Church has also had conversations with the non-Chalcedonian churches, the Syriac and the Coptic churches, and in fact came to an agreement with the Assyrian Church of the East, which represents the Syriac churches that split with the Orthodox after the Council of Ephesus in 431. And they even concluded a joint declaration on Christology in 1994, which was kind of amazing considering that was the point at which they diverged in the 5th century. In terms of Protestants, Vatican II represented a great step forward when the document Unitatis Redintegatio described them as separated brethren rather than heretics or schismatics, those were the terms that were previously used most commonly for Protestants. The goal of the ecumenical movements, for Catholics at least, is finally to be able to share in the Eucharistic feast with those who had been separated. But this coming together at the table requires not just a desire that we all get along and let bygones be bygones, but, as Pope John Paul II said in 1995, the unity willed by God can be attained only by the adherence of all to the content of revealed faith in its entirety. So the idea is to continue to discuss and come to an understanding of each other, and maybe someday to full agreement. Vatican II also led to other areas of reform. Liturgical reform is a big one, with the Council allowing the Mass to be spoken in local vernacular languages, and not just in Latin. A new code of canon law was called for, which was finally completed under John Paul II in 1983. And one of the things that was changed in the new version of canon law was that the process for someone being named a saint, that is, being canonized, was simplified. In fact, John Paul II named more saints than all the other popes before him put together. So the new rules were that martyrs can automatically be declared blessed or beatified, while a confessor, that is, someone who confessed or bore witness to the faith through his or her life, must have at least one miracle credited to him or her, and then one more miracle is required for that person to be named a saint. Such an individual who is declared a saint is guaranteed by the teaching function of the Church, which is known as the magisterium, to be enjoying the beatific vision of God in heaven. A saint is given a feast day in the Roman calendar, and all Catholics may freely celebrate and honor the saints. It should be no surprise that some people were horrified by Vatican II. Some thought it went way too far, where others were disappointed that it didn't go far enough. So just a few examples. The traditionalist Catholic groups who wanted to maintain the old liturgy, especially the use of Latin language for the Mass, and some of these groups, such as the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter and the Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest, have been approved by the Holy See, so any Catholic can go worship at any of their Masses. It's considered to be perfectly fine. While some, particularly the Society of Pius X, have not, although they claim to remain loyal to the Church. They're not, as you see, in full communion with Rome at this point, although steps have been made in that direction in the last couple of years. Some liberal Catholics felt the Church didn't go far enough. For example, theologians such as Hans Kung and Charles Curran were quite critical of the Council, and they in fact had their teaching authority withdrawn. It didn't mean they couldn't teach, it just meant they couldn't teach at a Catholic university. Likewise, for some, the question of women's ordination was the big one. A denial that women could ever be ordained has not been declared as a dogma, although John Paul II considered doing that, but he was talked out of it, and instead he just issued an encyclical, which is not obviously to the level of a dogma, but his encyclical stated that since Jesus only chose men to be his among the 12 apostles, then only men can be ordained. And by this, he was trying to say that the Church has no authority to ordain women, so it can't ever happen. That's, that was his perspective on the matter. Some women have been ordained by sympathetic bishops, but according to canon law, such women and the bishops who ordain them are automatically excluded. Other reforms tackled by Vatican II are still hot-button issues in the Church today. Artificial birth control, respect for all life, that is, opposition to abortion, euthanasia, and the death penalty, as you see some other issues as well. It has been more than 50 years since Vatican II, but between that and various scandals, the most important being the pre-sex abuse scandal, the Church has become even more committed to being a responsible and open institution in the world, not separate from it or above it.